welcome to the Craft Brewed Music Podcast, the official podcast of Craft Brewed Music, the home of small batch streaming. Here we explore better music for serious listeners and those who create it. I'm Brian Horner, founder and curator of Craft Brewed Music, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Aaron Stamen, a Craft Brewed Music artist. Hey Aaron, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Brian. I am still smiling and illuminated from our discussion with Jonathan Scales, a steel pan pioneer and very talented composer with whom we shared a very interesting conversation. Among many topics, we discussed his admiration for banjo virtuoso Bela Fleck, a person who also looms large as a figure in our musical education, and we've been big fans of Bela Fleck ourselves. He recounted a story that was the inspiration for a tune of his called Lurkin, about particular practices of his to lay in wait for Bela and members of the Flecktones whenever they would come to play at his college, and how eventually his persistence led to a relationship and the opportunity to play with some of his favorite musicians. But as I heard that story, I recalled and smirked about a somewhat similar but not quite as fruitful experience of mine when I was probably 15 years old. This would be 1991, and my mother, bless her heart, took me and a couple of my friends to see Bela Fleck and the Flecktones in Woodstock, New York, the Bearsville Theater. And it was one of the worst snowstorms of the year. And it was probably ill-advised that we even went there. I think we had to follow a snowplow in order to get to our destination. And we finally made it there. Somehow they had not canceled the concert. And before it was about to start, I went downstairs and they had there was the restrooms, and there was a line of payphones. It's back when payphones were a thing. And at the last payphone, I saw Bela Fleck on the telephone, and I couldn't help it. I found a dark corner and I waited.
You lurked.
And I lurked. I lurked like a very awkward, creepy teenager until his very lengthy phone conversation was over. And he realized at some point that there was someone there watching him, and looked over his shoulder several times. And I must have seemed harmless enough, because he was kind enough to come over and say hi and thank us for making the effort to come out and see him. And as always, it was a great show. But I never got him to play on my album after that, so it was not as successful as Jonathan Scales' experience with Lurkin.
Yeah, that's great. It was a fascinating interview. Went in some directions that I didn't foresee, and it was a great one. Let's start off and play one of our favorite songs from the Jonathan Scales Forchestra, Dream Life State. Thanks a lot for making time to do this. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So we wanted to hear a little bit about, how you got to be where you are and do what you're doing. We like to try to keep it a little bit kind of like craft root music outside the mainstream questions, and not so much just, where do you grow up and why do you like music? But in your case, we are really interested in how you got to the steel pans.
Okay, so how I got to the steel pans, it was kind of an interesting process. But I started off originally as a saxophone player when I was in sixth grade. And um, when I got to high school, like my last 2 years of high school, I got really interested in percussion, and I started doing drumline stuff also on top of that, like drumline and orchestral percussion stuff. And then it wasn't until I got to college that I was introduced to the steel pan. And it was a good friend of mine basically told me that there's this steel band, like a steel pan orchestra at the school, and she was like, "Hey, you should try out for it. It's really cool. We get to skip class, and we get to go on these trips and play all these concerts all over the place and stuff like that." And I wasn't really interested because I had come to school to study composition, and I wasn't really interested in picking up a new instrument, on the first week of school.
Yeah.
But um, she showed me where the instruments were, and I saw people play, and I got to play a little bit, and I was hooked from there.
I'm sort of glad and sort of disappointed that you didn't say that it was the skipping school that drew you in, because that would have been, it would have been a double edged sword.
Yeah, that was just an added bonus to like because the steel band that we were in at Appalachian State, we actually had a pretty crazy tour schedule for a college ensemble. We would perform at middle schools and elementary schools and high schools and nursing homes and all kinds of stuff. And we would go on a tour that would be like 2 or 3 days, but then every day we would play like three schools or something. So
Wow.
Right.
it was pretty cool.
And was the
Okay.
repertoire of that ensemble more traditional steel drum music?
It was a mix of traditional stuff and covers. We would do like some Disney covers. We would do some like rock covers, like Take on Me and stuff like that.
Oh, aha, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
or Walk
classic.
Like an Egyptian and like random tunes like that. But we also played like songs from like Disney tunes. Like we played Under the Sea from Little Mermaid, and we played songs from The Lion King. And then we also played like some classical pieces, and we played calypso. So we played a lot of stuff in that band.
Okay. And so from there, your exploration into jazz and using the term loosely, and funk and world and all the things that you bring in, was that kind of on your own? You borrowed a drum from the ensemble and kind of started to explore.
Well, mostly it was just the influence from my friends at the time. So, like I guess coming into school, I was really into classical music, and I was really into hip hop and rock music. Um, but then my friends were into things like, that's how I learned about Bela Fleck. That's how I learned about Chick Corea. That's how I learned about Miles Davis. That's how I learned about, Danny Elfman, and just that's how I learned about Andy Norell and Pat Metheny and all those guys, was just from the people I was hanging out with. They just had really cool taste in music.
Hmm.
So from there, I just kind of tried to apply all that stuff. And I was already there to be a composer. I was already writing music. I kind of already had my own, you know, kind of had my own way that I like to write music and stuff like that already from that time. So
Okay.
I
And then
just
alongside that, at some point, the pans became your primary voice for expressing those things.
right. I mean, for me, it was basically instantaneous. Even though I was supposed to be a saxophone player, um, I just was drawn to the pans. So that was tricky in my school because for every student had to have like a major instrument, no matter what your
Right.
major is in the music building. So
Right.
because I auditioned on saxophone, that was my had to be my major instrument, and also pan didn't count as an it didn't count as an instrument at that school.
Yeah, right.
So I had to take lessons every week on saxophone. I had to do a recital on saxophone. So
Interesting.
all of my extra steel pan stuff during college was done just after hours outside of school for no credit.
At what point did you start forming your own band?
So it wasn't until maybe like my sophomore year is when I saw Bela Fleck and Edgar Meyer play a duo concert at my college, and from there, that's when I um, started writing my own music that was geared towards like a small ensemble type of thing. You know, because before that, all of my stuff was geared towards just like, you know, like string quartets and woodwind ensembles and wind ensembles and orchestras and just, you know, solo piano pieces and just like building my repertoire that I had to do as a composer in school. You know, so it wasn't until like maybe around my sophomore year I started writing more to for like small ensembles, and then towards maybe like at the end of college is when I started to like put a band together.
One of the things about the steel pan that's intriguing to me, it's a very unique timbre, and there's aspects of the sound quality that remind me of the banjo. And that there's a very percussive attack. There's kind of this sculpted body, and then a very rapid decay,
Yeah.
which I find very kind of in common with the banjo as an instrument and how it's used musically.
Yeah, they have the similar attack, decay, sustain, release situation happening. Very
And
similar sounds.
was that part of your connection with Bela Flex music, that you already kind of had the steel pan um, bug going, and then you're like, wow, this is a way to apply this that would be interesting.
Not really. I never really, when I heard Bela play, I never really thought about it like that. That wasn't really what drew me to him. I think what drew me to him is he was kind of already, or he was kind of pushing the boundaries of what people expected of banjo, you know? And with the music that I was writing, I was already pushing the boundaries of what people expected of steel pan. And I didn't know that I was doing that, but people would start to tell me, man, this thing that you wrote, this is really a strange thing for the, I never heard a pan player play something like this.
Mhm.
So people were telling me that from the moment, from the very first time I started like, you know, using the pan in composition, people were telling me that. So when I heard Bela and I heard what he was doing, it was just like, all right, maybe I'm not a weirdo, you know, maybe I'm not an alien, because here's this
Okay.
guy who's really famous and he, you know, does stuff on his instrument that people aren't expecting.
Did you ever immerse yourself in traditional steel pan, or did you kind of always come at it from more of an outside perspective?
Um, so I never immersed myself in it, but I definitely, you know, learned, studied, and um, understand that world. You know what I mean? So I'm not a
Yeah.
stranger to it, but I didn't like go through a period where I said, okay, I'm only gonna play calypso and I'm gonna learn all the licks from all the great players and all,
Yeah.
you know, I'm gonna learn the lingo of. So you know, I kind of contribute that to like kind of having growing up in a military family and moving around and always having to adapt. So that's kind of how I am as a person anyway. I'm always taking a little bit of this, taking a little bit of that.
Are there kind of on the same in the same vein? Is there, because when Bela Fleck was branching out and becoming more experimental with using the banjo in different genres, there was kind of an external pressure to make sure that there was, he was still rooted to what is idiomatic for the banjo, and the bluegrass community is very protective of its traditions.
Right.
Do you feel the same kind of thing from the steel drum community in Calypso, that you need to give an appropriate nod to the tradition?
A little bit. So there are people who don't like what I do. Like there's a lot of people that are very traditional when it comes to steel pan, and because it's very culturally rich history coming from Trinidad and Tobago, and a lot of people went through a lot of stuff to create this instrument and make it what it is and to get it this far. And so a lot of people are very protective of that. Um, but I'm coming at it from my own perspective, so I just try to stay genuine to myself. But I definitely there's definitely people who, especially in the earlier days when I was just kind of like coming up and people were just starting to hear about me. Um, there were a lot of traditionalists that would kind of like go on the internet and say bad things about me.
Hmm.
But for every one traditionalist that was on the internet talking bad about me, there'd be like 15 people that were supportive, saying, hey, he's doing something different, and you know he's pushing the boundaries, and he's doing something that's you know off the beaten path, and people were very supportive.
And probably bringing a new audience to the traditional players as well.
Yeah, for sure.
It's fascinating that the various things that came together in your story. One of the things that Aaron and I both noticed as we kind of dove deep into your recordings was the prominent role that composition plays. And I've heard your stuff for a long time. As you know, I added it to the Craft Brew Music collection a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And kind of the tunes that I had gravitated toward initially were the kind of funkier tunes, um, and digging really deep into this, it's amazing to realize that a lot of these tunes are compositions where the bulk of the material is composed rather than improvised.
Right.
And so we were curious to hear you talk a little bit about how you approach that, that composition versus improvisation question.
Gotcha. It's funny you mentioned that because I just released this video about my ideas of composition versus improvisation. And we don't have to get deep into all that right now, but um, a lot of people ask me what percentage of my music is written, what percentage of it is improvised, and that's going to vary from tune to tune.
Sure.
So I do identify more as a composer than I do a steel pan player or a steel panist.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of my stuff is very composed. Um, so, but I also approach composition as if it were improvisation. And what I mean by that is like uh, I don't tend to just I tend to have the idea of what I want to do, like whatever the emotion is that I want to convey, whatever the idea is for the tune, and then just like me and you, all of us are improvising right now. We have the
Hmm.
idea of what we want to talk about, and then we use our knowledge that we've gained from our lives and speaking the English language, and we express the thought. Um, I compose in that way too, so my composition is also a form of improvisation because when I'm writing it, it's pretty much done right there on the spot instantaneously. I don't tend to like toil over, you know, I don't tend to toil over pieces of music even when it's composed. So a lot of it, even though it's like the set part that's going to be played over and over, a lot of times it was written in an improvisatory setting, so the lines are really blurred.
Written at the instrument.
Depends. So some stuff is of mine is written at the pan. Some stuff is written on instruments that I don't even play. That's another thing that's like one of my secrets is like, there's certain crazy lines of mine that I wrote on like an out of tune guitar, for example. Like a guitar where all the strings are all in different places, and I pick it up, I mess around, come up with something that's like, hey, I like the sound of that. I would have never come up with that. Then I transport that to my instrument, and then now I'm playing something that I would have never thought of playing.
Hmm.
You know, so there's stuff like that I do. So yeah, so even my compositions have a lot of improvisatory aspects.
Was it necessary for you in transforming some of those parts back onto to the steel pan to invent new techniques or do things that were not idiomatic for the instrument at all in order to pull that off?
No, no, nothing like that. Like, um, yeah, nothing like that. Like I'm so honestly, between us, I feel like I'm a decent steel pan player. There's players that can play circles around me any day of the week, you know. But I feel like the thing that has kind of helped me has just been my approach and my voice as a composer. So that being said, you know, when I come up with like these different ideas to play on the pan, it's nothing that's like impossible. You know what I mean? It's nothing where I have to like do any extended technique or anything like that to achieve.
Hmm.
It's just like the way I'm coming about it is different, but the technique is the same.
One of the anthems that I've had in this last week, which has been a difficult one out here, is your piece "We Came Through the Storm,"
Yeah.
which I think is a great example of this combination of something that's composed and has more complex instrumentation and different layers that come in as this ostinato is kind of reiterated over this 7 minutes of the piece. But at times it's just it's the power trio jamming in the middle as well, and it's this
Right.
great kind of ebb and flow of improvisation and the piece coming back in.
Yeah. I liked I liked hearing you talk about that just now. It's sometimes it's cool to just hear people's viewpoints of that. So
Well, I'm curious a little bit for that song because there's this cinematic quality to the
right.
to the piece and a kind of a dramatic arc to it. And what was the obviously it was before the current storm we're in.
Right.
Um, if there was a particular creative impulse for that particular piece.
So I will say that I always wanted to write music for movies, and so there's a lot of times where I kind of think cinematically. So in this piece, I just wanted to kind of convey a storm. That's, I mean, literally, that's, I wanted to like paint a picture of the storm and make people feel like, you know, they were a part of this thing. one part in particular that I can talk about in depth would be there's this middle section where everybody drops out and it's just the pan, and it kind of slows down, and then it builds back up little by little. It adds players, and it builds back up, gets faster and faster, and the time signatures change like crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The time signatures change as it speeds up, as it's going through all these chord progression, and as everyone starts playing more intensely. And when I was writing that part, you know, I decided that, all right, I want to like make it feel like there's a storm that's like coming. So I wrote the chords. I wrote these 8 chords that I felt like represented, this vibe that I wanted to get across about the storm. But then when it came to the time signature changes or the time changes, I said to myself, if this were really a storm, I wouldn't really have any say over which way the wind blows and things like that. So I actually used a random number generator to create those time changes.
Huh.
Yeah. So I just, and then also like, I had the chords already. I had 8 chords, and I assigned one time signature to each chord change. And, I went to Google, I typed in random number generator, I set my parameter to 8 or something like that. And then I just, kept hitting enter, and I took the first note or the first number that it gave me. And it turned out to be, it was a 5, 4, 7, 6, 7, 4, 7, 2. Those were the 8 numbers that shot out. I combined that with the chords. And then, so if you listen to We Came Through the Storm, you'll hear those numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 1, back to the top. And so like, I kind of combined the elements of like, okay, my feelings or whatever, my emotions of like writing these chords or whatever, I combined that with the element that I had no control over.
That's great.
There's random little things like that I do that, that's kind of how I developed my voice. I studied composition under a guy named Dr. Scott Meister, who was very modern, so like I came from a very modern school of thinking, very outside the box. I came from a school where it was very encouraged to push, your compositions as, outside the box. That's what it was all about. And so I was kind of very encouraged to try new ways and try new approaches and things like that. So that became a big part of my sound.
That's fascinating.
It's very effective, particularly as it culminates in that the brass comes in at the end.
Yeah.
God, I love that moment.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a quick intermission for a word from our sponsor, which is, well, us. Craft Brewed Music is a curated streaming service that streams better music for serious listeners. We'll help you discover music off the beaten path so that you become the person your friends turn to for recommendations. And we split our income with the artist, which allows you to support this important music. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, less than a latte. We're the small batch streaming app, available at the App Store and at Google Play. Or to hear samples and find out more about us, visit craftbrewedmusic.com. So on the Mixtape Symphony album, a piece, most of that is a multi-movement piece. Did you conceive that as a multi-movement piece in that order, or was that kind of an afterthought?
It was a mix of all. It was a mix of all those things. So I knew I wanted to make this multi-movement work, mostly inspired by Future Man, which you guys probably know him very well.
Of course,
But
yeah. I wanted to ask about that as a follow-up. So yeah, go ahead.
yeah, Future Man was always telling me that I needed to write long form. He always would tell me, man, all the great composers, back in the day, they used to write long forms. People were writing these novels on their instruments, and now people are just writing short stories. But people used to write novels with their instruments, with their music. And now we're just back to writing these little, 3-minute long short stories and stuff. So I decided to kind of like take both those concepts. And so with Mixtape Symphony, each of those pieces can stand alone as his own piece,
Mm-hmm.
or the whole thing can be played from top to bottom with seamless, seamless transitions between movements and things like that.
Is that also the case with your most recent recording, Mind State Music? That these were standalone pieces and a conglomeration, or was it preconceived as a sequence of landscapes?
Yeah, so Mindset Music is definitely, um, conceived as a sequence, as you say, um, and any of those movements could stand alone, um, because I am a fan of just like having just like almost like songs.
Mm-hmm.
So and all those movements have their own names, and there's people that like certain ones better than others, and there's people that gravitate towards one movement. So like I did conceive that to be uh, something that should be played all in one time, but also it's designed to where, like, in the modern world we live in, if you're on Spotify or something like that and you just want to listen to the man, which is the second movement,
Mm-hmm.
then you can just listen to the man and it works fine.
Do you always perform them as as full works?
So Mind State Music was written as a concerto for my band with a steel drum band, a steel drum orchestra as the accompaniment. So we performed it one time at the premiere, which was in Houston, Texas, like with the full steel band that was at a college there, San Jacinto College. And so that was the one time we actually got to perform the whole thing, because it's kind of a massive work. And we were supposed to perform it several times in April, including University of North Texas and um, different schools like that, also Appalachian State. Um, but because of the coronavirus, it all got shut down. So there's lots of students that spent the whole semester learning all that music, and then we didn't get to play it.
Oh. Are there versions of those individual movements that you can play as a trio with the orchestra?
Yes, actually. So we haven't done it a lot, but we've done the movement called the mud and the movement called the mouse. So we've done those just as a trio. But as a trio, it's completely different. It's not completely different, but like, for example, on the mud, there's like so many layers. Every instrument is its own layer. So there's like 10 layers that
Mhm.
build up together. But with the three of us, we just play it in a way, adding our own style, like our improvisatory style, and just like, building textures and things like that to where we can pull it off as its own thing.
The Mud is a great track.
Thank you.
The way the layers come together, and the different voices complement one another. It almost becomes this gigantic pipe organ.
Man, that's a cool way to think about it. That whole album was kind of it's a very personal album for me. Um, if you look at the album cover, you can probably, if you know me at all and you see the album cover, you can probably tell that a lot of crazy things were happening in my life around that time.
Brian and I were actually
Um,
talking about the Pillar album cover and how fun and whimsical that was, and how the next
yeah,
one was kind of disturbing.
yeah, and actually, in a lot of ways, the Pillar album cover too is sure is. I guess it'd be seen as fun and whimsical too, but that also was kind of like a deep album for me too.
Hmm.
Both of those albums were kind of like heavy in terms of like um Yeah, both those albums were really kind of a heavy thing for me, but Pillar was more packaged in a way that was presentable just to the general masses. Like even, Dream Life State that you have referenced, um, like that tune actually comes from a heavy place also, but it sounds fun.
Right. Interesting.
And also there's no words, so you never know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean that song, Dream Life State is like literally one day I was driving down the road and I'd gone like a lot of crazy stuff had happened in my life in terms of like, marriages and all kinds of stuff, just crazy life adult stuff,
Hmm.
where my life was kind of turned upside down. But that particular day, for some reason, I was unusually happy. Like considering everything that was happening in life, I was unusually happy this day, and I started just singing into my phone, like in the voice memo, and that became Dream Life State. So like the thing about it is like it sounds happy and it sounds like cheerful, but it really is like is like this tiny window of happiness. You know what I mean? It's really cool and sounds really happy, but like that's why there's a lot of like harmonic twists and turns and melodic twists and turns that are like not characteristic of a tune that's actually happy. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah, well, I think that's one
Yeah.
of the strong features of your composition is that it's at its face very accessible and seems whimsical and fun. You're like, oh wow, I can it's easy to get into. Then you're
Right.
as you listen deeper, you're like, there's a lot going on here. This is complicated, and I don't get as much of this as I think I do.
Yeah. Like mindset music is like the ultimate of that because um for one, it was never meant to be released as an album. Like it honestly was a commission from that school I told you about in Texas, San Jacinto
Hmm.
College. So the professor Mike Misma, he reached out to me to write this piece. So that's all it was supposed to be was the performance of this piece at this college, and the students they spent the entire semester learning it, and the orchestra went there and played it. That was supposed to be it. But then because I spent so much time writing this music, I said, I should release this as an album, even though it's not really it's only 6 tracks and it's not like the most accessible music. But I feel like I owe it to my fans and things like that who want to dive deeper. So that's why I released Mind State Music. So um, I never recommend Mind State Music as the first thing to listen to of mine. It's definitely like a more of a deep dive.
What do you recommend as your gateway album?
I recommend Pillar.
Hmm.
Yeah, so Pillar's my sixth album, but I feel like it is a culmination of my career up to that point. Um, and I put a lot into Pillar. Um, just having that idea that I wanted an album that I felt like would be a stamp for me, you know, just as an artist, like after I'm long gone, like I just feel like Pillar kind of encapsulates my whole thing. I think that it really, and I did that on purpose. Like I feel like Pillar was me like saying, okay, I've honed my craft for like 12 years. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
let me make an album that like represents that. And so that's why for me that's why it's cool that Bela's on it, and you know my heroes are on there.
Yeah,
Like
there's some great guests on that album.
yeah. So that's Pillar. Um, and then like yeah, Mindset Music is more like a deep dive, and there's tunes in there that like people like the Mud, that have like deep psychological meanings. But it's kind of like art, it's kind of like a painting. So there's paintings that like we'll never know what the artist was really thinking, but they might look a certain way, and we might hang them up on our walls, or we might get the tattoo, or we might wear the T-shirt with the print on it, or something like that. But we might not know the full extent of what the artist is thinking. And I feel like Mind State Music is one of those for me, where there's just a lot. There's a lot of heaviness in there. Like a good example is the second movement, which is called The Man. Um, all the students that learn that's their favorite movement overall. Like if there was like a poll of from all the colleges, even all the colleges that we didn't get to play it in April, like University of North Texas, University of Southern Mississippi, Northern Illinois, Appalachian State, all these places that we were supposed to play. Um, I feel like people like the second movement because it sounds upbeat and fun. But like um, my headspace when writing that and like what it really means
Mhm.
is like a deeper level. But that's the cool thing about art is like it's up to the interpretation and how people perceive it.
The tune Lurkin from Pillar literally describes you waiting around trying to meet Bela and the other Flecktones, your heroes, as you put it. And of course, Howard Levy of the Flecktones plays on that track. Uh, and the other guys, several of them play on Pillar. Um, did you ultimately were you ultimately successful in meeting Bela through that stalking methodology?
Yes, actually, it worked out very well. Uh, so, I mean, the way it kind of worked was, I mean, the very first time was when I was in college, actually, and the Flecktones were playing at my college, Appalachian State in North Carolina, and I ran into Victor outside of the theater, and I was probably like a sophomore. Um, I was probably like a sophomore in college, and I ran up to Victor Wooten and said, "Hey, man, my name's Jonathan. I play the steel pan. Can I jam with you guys at soundcheck?" And Victor was like, sure, I guess, just I guess go get your stuff and just, kind of wait in the wings and, we'll see what happens. And I'll talk to Bela. Cause cause in that band, Victor, like he's like, Bela's, he's the boss, you know what I mean? So like Victor can't just bring me in just randomly, he had to talk to Bela and stuff, but Victor was like, sure, I don't know. So anyway, I went and I got my pans and I brought him back to the theater and I just waited in the wings while the Flecktones rehearsed. And then eventually Bela came over with his banjo on and his picks on his fingers. And he shook my hand and said, so Victor said you want to play a couple songs with us. And so I played with the Flecktones when I was a sophomore in college in front of in an empty auditorium. During their sound check, I just jammed with them on two songs. And, that was like the early days of me playing pan. So I probably wasn't that great, but they were very supportive and they were just like, yeah, good job, man. Keep it up. And they were just very nice.
Yeah.
And then I just kept showing up like over and over and over. I wouldn't play with them, but like I would show up like at sound check or before sound check. And that's how the lurking thing came about, where I would drive to Nashville or Knoxville or, somewhere in Virginia to see the Flecktones. And then, Bela would see me for like the 10th time. And then he would see me like by the tour bus and he would point to me and say lurking and then just get on the bus and then that was it. So like he wouldn't even say, no, I'm just joking. Good to see you, man. He would say lurking and then that was it. But by that point, like, I'd see Victor and we'd talk a while. I see Future Man and we talk a long time. And, I got to know all the guys that way, but Bela was always the most standoffish one. But I feel like when I I did a cover of like, I can't even really call it a cover. It's like I transcribed some crazy Bela Fleck stuff from one of his concertos.
Mm.
And I released a video of that. And when I did that, that's kind of when things started to turn around with me and Bela. I guess when he saw that there's this guy playing like the crazy, not just like, some of his songs like Sinister Minister, things like that, but like some of the craziest, most insane stuff that he's ever played. And then I'm playing it on the pan. I think that it kind of like piqued his interest a little more, maybe. And then, at that point, I still kept showing up and stuff. But then at that point, you know, I was hanging.
Yeah.
And then Bela would introduce me to people. Bela introduced me to Howard Levy and was like, "Hey, this guy right here, he transcribed my concerto in steel pan." So then I became that guy.
Okay.
And then finally, when it came around to me asking Bela to play on Pillar, it worked out. And when it came to me asking Bela to play on NPR, on Tiny Desk, it worked out.
That's great.
Tell us a bit more about the tune "Focus Poem" and how that was conceived.
So like I said, the whole album Pillar, kind of, I was in a certain place at that time. And Focus Poem really is just about, it's not about any particular story like Lurkin is, but Focus Poem is just more about this like intense, like this kind of like this work ethic kind of thing that I'm kind of known for, where it's just like I'm intensely focusing on getting things done and pushing forward, so that's where that kind of momentum comes in, and I just try to encapsulate that into music. Because during that time there was so much happening that like the music was really keeping me focused, and the music was really keeping me on track.
And what was it written with Bela Fleck in mind?
Actually, it was not. So there's a tune of mine called "This Is the Last Hurrah."
Yeah.
That's on Pillar, and Jeff Coffin is on "This Is the Last Hurrah." But I wrote "This Is the Last Hurrah" with Bela in mind originally, and it's actually called "This Is the Last Hurrah" because I'd already written Lurkin, I learned the concerto, I did all this stuff to like try to win the heart of Bela Fleck, and it never worked at that point. So when I wrote "This Is the Last Hurrah," it was designed to like say, all right, I'm going to write this piece with the intention of getting Bela Fleck to play on it on my next record.
You've studied orchestration formally, I'm sure, in your time at school, but this is a new flavor for modern composition and chamber music to have a steel pan. And to me, it's really interesting. I mean, that's undiscovered territory, how it's going to sound when you combine it with a soprano saxophone or a muted trumpet or a banjo that has similar sonic qualities, as I mentioned before. And that seems to be a process of invention that you have to figure out how this fits in with those more traditional voices.
I mean, I guess so, but I guess my thing is like I never see it like that. Like, because ultimately the steel pan is an instrument. It's just in the same, and with an instrument you speak a language or a dialect or something. So in the same way that like a person who speaks English from China can talk to a person who speaks English from Germany. You know what I mean? It's very similar to that idea where like, there's only 12 notes in, this Western system of music that we play. You know what I mean? So like if I'm using those 12 notes and you're using those 12 notes, we can make something work if we're listening to each other in the same way where like, English speakers from around the world can speak English together based off of what they know. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like I've never gone into it thinking how's the steel pan going to fit in this? Because the only reason why we think it can is just because of what we know. We just automatically assume like, oh, I've never heard it in that context, or I've never I've only seen this instrument do this, or I've only seen this instrument do that. But like I'm not thinking like that at all. So I just say, oh, this will be cool, and then I just do it.
thank you for listening. Craft Brewed Music, both the podcast and the streaming service, has the mission of promoting this music and these artists. We can't do that without ears on the music. So if you like what you've heard here, we're going to ask 2 small favors. First, tell someone about the podcast. Secondly, go to the App Store or Google Play, download the Craft Brewed Music app, and try a free 2-week trial of the streaming service. For more information, visit us at craftbrewedmusic.com. Thanks again, and see you next time.